Got no money.
Nearly 40% of voters now believe Joe Biden did something illegal. When it comes to his son's business deals, 25% say that he did something unethical, while 34% say that he did nothing seriously wrong. 50% of voters now believe Hunter Biden did do something illegal when it comes to foreign business deals.
How much you going to drop?
Up 13% just from February. Joining me right now is Pennsylvania Congressman Scott Perry. He's chairman of the House Freedom Caucus and a member of the House Oversight Committee. Congressman, good to see you. Thanks very much for being here. You're on the Oversight Committee. You've been seeing and reporting lots of new information. What can you tell us about the Biden family?
Well, listen, Maria, first of all, good morning. What I can tell you is probably what maybe some people don't know is up to 20 LLCs to run money through, to launder money through from foreign countries, questionable people from questionable people legally from questionable countries, and then that money distributed to 9 and potentially 11 members of the Biden family. The bank records in one case show that one of the distributions went to Biden. It doesn't say which Biden, which is very odd. I can also tell you that the agency, certainly the family, have been stonewalling the investigation as much as possible. And so it's been difficult to get all the information. And so we're going to have to take some more extraordinary measures of subpoenas and requests to get the information that we need. And Devin Archer came in and essentially corroborated the story of the FBI informant that said that Hunter Biden and Joe Biden received $5 million each to deal with this issue in Ukraine, and the prosecutor, of course, Viktor Shokin, was fired, even the president of Ukraine at the time said he had done nothing wrong, but he was investigating Hunter Biden, and he was investigating the company Burisma for illicit activity, and coincidentally, as you know, then Vice President Biden said, well, what do you know, son of a B, they fired the prosecutor, and then, of course, Ukraine got the $1 billion in loan guarantees. So that's what we're looking at. It certainly all looks like probable cause, Maria.
Well, I mean, look, everything you just went through would be bribery. And these are the charges that some of your colleagues have spoken about. If it's bribery, then why is Joe Biden still president? Are you in favor of an impeachment inquiry?
I certainly am. I've been in favor of an inquiry for some time, because what that does is it opens up a different avenue for us, the House of Representatives, to get information. The American people need to know whether the president is crooked or not. That's the bottom line here. And whether it's bribery, in one case it was called extortion. We need to know, and there's an election coming, he's the sitting president. And certainly he would want his name cleared, if anybody would, I would think. And so the information ought to be forthcoming. one question that hasn't been answered is what is the 17 to 20 million dollars that we currently know of coming from foreign countries, oligarchs, questionable individuals? What did that money pay for? What were those people paying for? What did they get in return? And Hunter Biden didn't really provide any, he didn't provide anything. So if it was Joe Biden, what did Joe Biden provide? And if it was policy decisions that should be made on behalf of America and the American people, that instead were made on behalf of the people that were paying this money, then we've got a problem, whether it's bribery or extortion or just plainly influence peddling and selling America.
Yeah, I mean, look, on day one, Joe Biden walked into the White House in 2021, and one of the first things he did was cancel the China initiative. I know China and the Communist Party of China wanted that to happen. We're wondering if that was a decision he was paid for. What about the decision to sign a memorandum of understanding back in 2013, which allowed thousands of Chinese companies to trade on U.S. exchanges and not follow any auditing rules? Another head scratcher. Why would you allow Chinese companies trading on U.S. exchanges and not follow the same SEC rules that every other American company follows? Kaylee McGee-White, we've been trying to identify which specific decisions Joe Biden made that he was paid for. We don't know.
Absolutely. And Congressman, your colleague James Comer has made it clear that this is a case he's building that he intends to bring to court. So my question for you is, why was Devin Archer, who is a key witness in this case, why was he not under oath before your committee?
It was the deal that I think was worked out between his lawyers and the people on the oversight committee. And I think that we must understand that this is just probably the first time that we will see Devin Archer. As more information becomes available, he likely will be under oath. Unfortunately, at that time, he might also be serving prison time. But this is a lengthy investigation, as you know. And the other thing that we don't want to do, and I respect Chairman Comer for this, is we don't want to make accusations unduly and ruin people's lives unnecessarily when we're looking for facts. But when the facts present themselves, we're going to ferret them out and we're going to highlight them and we're going to follow up to their due course. But we have to proceed judiciously. We're not the left here. We don't just accuse people, destroy lives, and then move on to the next target.
Well, let me move on to the next issue here, and that is policy. President Biden is celebrating the Inflation Reduction Act. Yesterday was the one-year anniversary at the White House. He also touted the impact of Bidenomics. Take a listen.
For a plan that's turning things around. The Inflation Reduction Act is a part of that plan. Bidenomics is just another way of saying restoring the American dream.
Congressman, your reaction, and we should also point out that just the other day, Joe Biden admitted that the Inflation Reduction Act was wrongly named because, in fact, it doesn't really reduce inflation at all. In fact, it's more of a climate change agenda bill.
Yeah, it is the climate change agenda bill, and of course, my constituents, my bosses, and those people all across the country that are struggling to pay their food bill, their mortgage, buy a home, buy a car. When Fitch downgrades America's credit, when the Wall Street Journal and The Hill says that we're spending way too much money on things like destroying the American energy prospect and energy, not only energy dominance, not even energy independence. These are all things that are part and parcel to the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which have done exactly the opposite and made our economy very perilous, very precarious, and it's difficult for people. The people that I represent are struggling right now financially because of this policy. And if you got to buy electricity, you're paying more. If you got to buy gasoline, if you got to buy diesel fuel, you're paying more, and your choices are being limited. And then, it goes to the banning of the gas stove, but it also goes to your current daily life right now, where your energy bills are higher, and the bills that you pay for every single thing else, whether it's a stuffed toy at Walmart or groceries, are higher because energy is connected to every single one of them.
Yep. All right. We will leave it there. Congressman, good to see you. Thanks very much. Scott Parody joining us this morning.
Good to see you.
In Pennsylvania. Thank you, sir.
Did you know that using regular hair growth shampoo actually doesn't help you prevent hair loss? Even a little? You might not have noticed it yet, but studies show that male pattern baldness essentially starts in the early 20s. It's hard to spot until it shifts to a serious stage, but the nightmare has already begun, slowly approaching you. Once it reaches any of these stages, it's hopeless to stop hair thinning because your scalp has already deteriorated to its worst condition. Most people blame their genes for this, but the truth is, over 80% of American men are struggling with thinning hair due to sebum plugs. This is what your scalp actually looks like right after washing your hair. Particles of regular shampoo are too large to reach deep into the pores. A mixture of both oil and dirt lodged deep in the pores can be completely cleansed, leaving insufficient space for new hair to grow. Since the pores are blocked, there's no way to deliver nutrients or any active ingredients to the scalp. This leads to the death of hair roots, ultimately resulting in hair thinning and loss. Regardless of how expensive the hair growth products you use are, they won't work with such a poor scalp condition. However, washing your hair more frequently could cause additional damage. So, we completely hopeless? Hold on. All this can be resolved by using a carbonic acid shampoo recommended by dermatologists. It uses a completely different method to prevent hair loss and promote hair growth. This method has also been featured in magazines such as GQ, Wired, and Golf Digest. Well, what are other users saying about it? I noticed my hair loss too late and I was about to give up. But look at my hair now. This stuff is definitely a miracle. No more side effects after switching to this. It's safe, effective, affordable. I have nothing to complain about with this amazing product. It's been only a month and I can barely see my scalp now. My hair grows way faster than the time when I was using minoxidil. Introducing the most advanced hair growth shampoo, Fortero. In just 15 seconds, I'll tell you why Fortero is effective for thinning hair and also preventing hair loss. This rich, creamy, carbonated foam is the key to bringing a miracle to your hair. Even carbonic acid therapy at a luxury hair salon only has about 1,000 ppm, but Fortero has 8 times the absorption at 8,000 ppm. Look at its absorption power. The expansion power of dense carbonic acid can open up the pores and suck up all the dead cells and dirt that have clogged the pores. Not only that, carbonic acid can also improve our blood circulation. Let's apply some Fortero shampoo to our skin. 1 minute later, you can see our body temperature is getting much higher. The good blood flow makes it easier for nutrients to reach the pores, stimulating both the buried hair and new hair to grow incredibly fast. The secret of Fortero doesn't end there. Finally, now that the pores can breathe and the blood...
And for more on all this, let's bring in New York Congresswoman Claudia Tennant. Great to see you again. Thanks for being here. You know, I've gone over the Treasury Department's brief on the one-year anniversary of the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. It has nothing in it about reducing inflation. It's all about spending and green energy plans and more regulation, both of which, spending and regulation, are inflationary. They're not anti-inflation. They actually cause more inflation.
Well, exactly. If you remember, just before this bill was getting passed, before they even said Inflation Reduction Act, the Democrats were all doing press conferences and press releases saying, this is the biggest green energy bill in American history. You might as well call it the Green New Deal. And they were all doing a victory lap on being the Green New Deal, which is really dangerous for us because, you know, it's just another way. They used inflation reduction in a way to kind of give us the Trojan horse of the Green New Deal, which is why our energy costs continue to be very high, especially in rural areas, upstate New York, places where I live, where we have, you know, abundant shale gas reserves, but we can't touch them. We're still trying to get huge subsidies to green energy companies, including giving them charging stations. And then our Governor, Kathy Hochul, has given even more subsidies and more benefits to people who pursue green energy. But that's not bringing down the cost of energy, nor is it bringing down inflation, which, as you can see, it might be off a little bit, but people are still paying more now and probably will continue to pay more for all their costs, goods, services, everything they need, including groceries.
And let me just read a sentence, just one sentence from this 3-page memo from Treasury Department. It says, in our first year of implementation, the Treasury Department is focused on achieving 3 goals, that is from the Anti-Inflation Act: creating good-paying jobs, strengthening our energy security, and tackling the climate crisis. Again, nothing about bringing down inflation, but strengthening our energy security. Does anybody think that losing our energy independence that we had during the previous administration, losing that has strengthened our energy security?
Man, it's strengthening Biden's pocket.
Absolutely not.
That's what it's
That's
strengthening.
the biggest problem we see in our country today and around the world. It is about energy. Energy is probably the...
Like I said, strengthening Biden's fucking pocket. That's about the only thing this shit doing. Cause like I said, Joe Biden's a fucking criminal who should have never became fucking president.
It is energy that is causing the war in Ukraine. The Russians are leveraging their energy dominance, which By the way, we have better energy, better oil, better gas. We never would have been in this situation had we been truly energy dominant and had energy security. So energy is really critical to our growth. That's the only way we're going to get out of the spending and the debt crisis that we face. It's going to be growth, and it's going to be using our energy resources that we have in a smart way. We can do that.
Yeah, player. We'll get it to you.
I'm from the state of New York. Do you know that we only have 3 operating nuclear power plants in the entire state, and they're trying to take our gas stoves away from us? They're trying to get us to net zero on fossil fuels, and yet that's all we have for any kind of baseload energy. What are they going to do when we get 7 feet of snow in Buffalo again, or 5 feet of snow in my district, and really, really cold temperatures? And we actually have people dying and people struggling to even pay their bills. And by the way, people should know the latest bill that the left-wing Democrats, who dominate the Albany as well, there's a rationing component to this energy bill in New York. So when they talk about energy security, what do you do when you're a senior citizen and you're in October and you've used up all the energy?
Yep.
What are you going to do when you get to the winter time?
This is what they're not thinking. All the talk about global warming, there are many, many more people who die from cold than die from heat in the world, in the whole world. I mean, I think it's like it's by a factor of 10 more people dying from the cold. You know, the president actually tipped his hat last week in a conversation. We don't have the tape of it, but I'll just read part of what he said. He said, "I wish I hadn't called it that," talking about the Anti-Inflation Act. He says it actually has less to do with reducing inflation than it does providing for alternatives that generate economic growth. I mean, so he came out and admitted it, but you knew it back in the time that he was trying to sell it. Why didn't Senator Manchin?
Well, look, it's green energy subsidies. That's what he's talking about. You know, billions of dollars to go to wealthy people who is, you know, forced to drive to work like we are in upstate New York. Again, we don't have a lot of public transportation, but they don't talk about that because this is truly a bill for the elites and for the wealthiest and for the Democrat donors to really cash in. And that's what they're doing. They're going to be continuing their private equity investment into these green energy companies and see the rest of the taxpayers are going to be suffering.
It bugs me that Senator Manchin bought into the whole thing. He should have known better. He's been around Washington long enough. The other thing is, and
he's from West Virginia.
Yeah, well, and there are frankly some Republicans have bought into this too. And also something that Republicans worries us that they're buying into is the idea of not extending the Trump tax cuts. That's about the only thing that we have going for us in terms of the prosperity that we do have going and compared to a lot of other countries around the world. And now I just don't get the sense that the House Ways and Means Committee, which you're a member of, is pushing hard enough to extend those Trump tax cuts. What's happening there?
Well, we passed a bill that has almost everything in the Trump tax cuts plan. It doesn't add back in the state and local tax deduction, which is causing some angst among blue state Republicans who would like to see us give that. Basically what it is it's a subsidy, it's a giveaway, it's a loophole to the wealthiest.
But what our viewers are seeing right now is the increase in tax revenue after the tax rate cuts of the Trump years, as opposed to what people are saying that we were going to lose all this tax revenue. We actually gained tax revenue after the Trump tax.
Absolutely. And that's because they focused on growth. You know who produces more growth than any other industry? The small business owner. The small business owners benefited from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which a lot of the Democrats didn't understand.
Because they can't understand it. They can't get it. The legal line lawyers. They don't want to get it. They don't want to get it.
The pass-through income benefits through the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. They were able to add employees, grow their own businesses, and for the first time, we actually saw something positive coming out of our state because of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act to counter the bad policies coming out of Albany. So they were a really good thing. I mean, you hear the Democrats complaining about them. They also don't like to talk about the repatriation tax benefit that was in there. So big companies, big iconic companies like, for example, Corning, founded in Corning, New York, was able to bring thousands of jobs back, spent, over $1 billion right into the U.S. Treasury in order to get that benefit. But in the long run, we took, I think, over $1 trillion came in from repatriated funds that were sitting in bank accounts from U.S. companies that were brought back into our U.S. Treasury, encouraging investment and growth in our own jobs, our communities. It's why so many of the unions supported it. I heard you say in the clip, or Biden say in the clip earlier, the unions are buying into the green energy. Well, the unions would like us to see more nuclear power and more investing in
gas and oil
energy
jobs.
fossil fuels.
Pumping gas and oil are union jobs, and there have been thousands of those that have been lost. Very quickly, to end this up, I want to switch to immigration because it really is hitting cities and counties much further than the border. Up here in New York, I'm just wanting the pinch of the migration problem that we're having.
Well, absolutely. I mean, this has become a disaster. You've seen 2 illegal immigrants alleged and accused of rape just up in the Buffalo region in Erie County, just outside my district. You're seeing crimes committed by these immigrants being dumped on the communities. They can't afford them. It's a huge problem, but Kathy Hochul put $1 billion in new taxes into the last budget just to pay for new illegal immigrants coming across both the northern and, yes, the southern border, which is also New York State. So they have created this crisis with their money. They're incentivizing immigrants to come through. They've created sanctuary cities. They've encouraged these people to come, and now the taxpayers are paying for it. And it's a tragic situation.
You're through, boss.
The crimes that are being committed.
Your helicopter will be with you directly.
But it's, Joe Biden's policies. Kathy Hochul is a proxy, and unfortunately Mayor Adams is paying the big price. Imagine if they had the kind of inflow into New York State and New York City people in Texas and the southern border are experiencing.
It's just a fraction of what they're getting at the border. Congresswoman, thank you so much for being here. Semper Fi to you and your family. Appreciate it. I now recognize the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Mr. Smith.
Let me begin by thanking Chairman Kelly for allowing me here and for your leadership. We are incredibly grateful that you are at the realm of this committee with your experience, your knowledge, and your passion. And glad to have you leading our tax writing committee. Mr. Plowden, no one in the Biden administration has the power to write U.S. tax policy. The Supreme Court has said that the power to tax involves the power to destroy. It is, and under the Constitution, it is strictly controlled. The power to tax demands the highest level of accountability to the American people, especially when masses of jobs are at risk. And while every member seated here today is accountable to voters, you and Secretary Yellen are not. I have 8 specific questions on Treasury's engagement with the tax writing committees over the OECD negotiations, and I ask that you please just answer yes or no. Was Congress consulted prior to Treasury agreeing to a UT-PR surtax that would allow foreign governments to tax the U.S. operations of U.S. companies?
We did receive input from Congress on the UTPR during the
That's a yes.
negotiations.
That's a yes.
We did receive input from Congress, yes.
Okay, I followed this issue very closely over the past 3 years, and I don't think that's the case. I know that Treasury has never consulted with Republican members prior to a decision. And unless you would like to revise your testimony, please provide to this committee in writing the date of the consultation, the names of Treasury personnel involved, and the names of members of Congress that Treasury met with. Can you give me that information?
We get input from Congress in many different ways.
Can you give me that information?
From letters, from consultation with staff as well.
Yes or no? Can you provide this committee that information?
I do not have that information currently.
So how do you know what you just testified before Congress
truth.
is accurate?
Because they can lie.
Receive input from Congress in multiple ways. As I said,
What are those multiple ways and from what members?
through hearings, through letters from Congress.
What hearings?
Members. The Treasury is called before House Ways and Means. The Secretary Yellen has testified before Ways and Means.
Testified after she made the negotiations in regards to it.
We received letters from members as well.
Let me ask you another question. Was Congress consulted prior to Treasury accepting this recent offer by foreign countries to delay the UTPR surtax by just 1 year?
Again, we received input from Congress and from taxpayers with concern.
You did not consult with the chairman of the tax writing committee, so who did you consult with?
We received input from the tax writing committees on the UTPR and concerns about...
No one from our committee on the Republican side. So was it only the Democrat side you spoke with?
Yep.
We speak with staff of the tax writing committee on a bipartisan basis on a regular...
1 year. Did you speak to the majority in the tax writing committee of Ways and Means?
Nope.
We received input on concerns about the UTPR and concerns about application of the UTPR to parent jurisdictions, especially in the early years.
You received letters from us, but did you consult with us before this decision? Yes or no?
We speak with the tax writing committees on a regular basis.
Well, I'm the chairman of this committee, and it's almost crickets. So you might want to do a little bit better in regards to that. Was Congress consulted prior to Treasury agreeing that the U.S. R&D credit would be disadvantaged versus the R&D credits of other countries like the UK?
I cannot speak to that decision. This has been an ongoing process for multiple years, and that is a long-standing distinction in the Pillar 2 rules.
Yeah, it's pretty detrimental to U.S. businesses. Were you part of the negotiation?
I rejoined Treasury in October of 2021. The Pillar 2 negotiations have been going on since 2018.
So since 2021, when you were in the negotiations, R&D hasn't been discussed around you?
We have raised the R&D credit as an important issue in the negotiations.
Did anyone in Congress sign off on the decision to give generous, refundable corporate tax credits and Chinese state subsidies an advantage over more typical tax incentives like those enacted by Congress on a bipartisan basis? Yes or no?
Again, I was not part of the negotiations when that decision was made. That's been an issue in the Pillar 2 negotiations that's long-standing.
Can you find that answer out for me?
I will check on that and come back to you.
I would love that to be submitted. Did Treasury consult with Congress prior to Treasury conceding that the U.S. GILTI rule would not receive full grandfathering status as the only global minimum tax in the world? Yes or no?
I was not part of the negotiations at that juncture.
So, once again, can you provide me the answer to that question with whoever at Treasury that was?
I will check on that.
Did anyone in Congress sign off on Treasury's decision to surrender U.S. tax revenues from GILTI and Subpart F because of the OECD's preference for local corporate minimum taxes?
You're speaking about the qualified domestic minimum taxes. So we, again, received input on that. The qualified domestic minimum taxes are consistent with all international tax rules that provide the primary taxing right to a jurisdiction when it taxes its residents on
income that arrives.
I understand that it is, but my question was, did anyone in Congress sign off on Treasury's decision?
Again, we receive input from Congress in many ways.
Once again, I ask, unless you would like to revise your testimony, please provide to the committee in writing the date of the consultation with the members of Congress, the names of Treasury personnel involved, and the names of members of Congress that Treasury met with. Did anyone in Congress sign off on the decision for a 15% global minimum tax rate to replace the 12 to 13% rate that the OECD was considering prior to President Biden taking office?
I was not part of the negotiations at that stage.
Can you get that information for the committee?
I will check on that.
Was Congress consulted prior to Treasury agreeing on the scope of the Pillar 1 profit allocation, which skews heavily against U.S. companies while exempting their foreign headquartered competitors?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Was Congress, once again, was Congress consulted prior to Treasury agreeing on the scope of the Pillar 1 profit allocation, which skews heavily against U.S. companies while exempting their foreign headquartered competitors?
I don't think that it exempts foreign MNEs under Pillar 1. So I'm not sure I understand
From my understanding, it does. So would you be opposed to it if it did not exempt those foreign headquartered competitors?
Sorry,
would Treasury be opposed to it?
I don't think that it does exempt foreign headquartered multinationals in Pillar 1.
So in regards to Pillar 1 profit allocation period, did Treasury consult with any members of Congress?
We continue to consult with Congress about Pillar 1. Pillar 1 remains open. There are many open issues on Pillar 1.
So it goes back to my simple question. You said yes, you have. I would love for you all to provide in writing to this committee who you consulted with, what members of Treasury that consulted with us, and what date in the OECD negotiations. My final question: most observers are skeptical that China will ever truly comply with its OECD agreement. Secretary Yellen recently traveled to China to meet with the Chinese Communist Party officials. During that trip, was she able to obtain commitments from China that it would adopt the OECD agreement and implement it fairly?
Secretary Yellen did meet with her Chinese counterparts, and in an attempt to reset the relationship with China, I do not know whether they spoke about Pillar 2, but the new TPR is an important part of Pillar 2 that ensures that China and other jurisdictions do not gain an advantage if they do not adopt Pillar 2. And that's why the UTPR is an important part of Pillar 2. It provides an enforcement mechanism that ensures that Chinese multinationals will be subject to the same minimum tax as other multinationals.
We know China's really not that great of following rules and agreements. We've seen that with our country. That's why I was hopeful that the Treasury Secretary, in her long visit to China, would definitely have talked to them about whether they would adopt OECD and the agreement and implement it fairly. Since it's so important, I figured that would be top of her list. Whether by manipulating financial statements or by creating new state subsidies, China will find ways to evade these OECD rules, and allowing CCP-supported companies to gain a competitive advantage against the United States is yet another failure in these negotiations by the Biden administration. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
We've been bullshitted all the way around the board by a criminal organization, the Biden fucking family.